Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a time where it is easy to become consumed by the outer world, by the expectations of others, by the pursuit of success, and by the endless noise that demands our attention. Yet the greatest journey we will ever take is not outward, but inward, for within us lies a vast and hidden landscape filled with truths we avoid, shadows we suppress, and potential we have not yet claimed. Today, we gather to reflect on what it means to stop running from ourselves, to embrace what has long been ignored, and to recognize that the path to wholeness requires honesty, courage, and self-awareness. This is not a comfortable path, but it is the only one that leads to authenticity, to a life lived not in exile from ourselves, but in harmony with who we truly are. Avoidance of the self leads to inner exile, a condition more silent and more painful than most external struggles we face. When a person begins to distance themselves from who they truly are, they unknowingly create a gap between their inner reality and the life they live on the outside. This gap is not just psychological, it is existential. To avoid the self is to deny the very essence of one's being, and that denial slowly turns into a kind of inner banishment where the individual feels like a stranger in their own existence. The world may see a smiling face, a hard-working person, or even someone who looks accomplished, but beneath that appearance lies an emptiness, an unsettled restlessness, a sense that something vital has been left behind. Avoidance begins subtly. It may start with ignoring uncomfortable emotions, anger, fear, grief, or shame. These emotions, instead of being acknowledged and processed, are buried deep within, sealed under layers of busyness, entertainment, or external validation. But what is buried does not vanish. It lives on, waiting in the shadows of the psyche. Each time an unwanted feeling arises, it is suppressed again, and with each suppression, the person moves further away from their authentic self. This disconnection leads to a split within, a quiet war between the face presented to the world and the reality that lies hidden. Inner exile manifests in countless ways. Some experience it as a constant unease, a feeling of not belonging anywhere. Others feel it as a hollow kind of loneliness that no company can cure. There are those who achieve success, wealth, or recognition, only to find themselves unable to enjoy it because the deepest part of them remains unheard and unseen. To exile oneself from the truth of who they are is to walk through life wearing a mask so convincing that even they begin to mistake it for their real face. And yet, behind that mask, a voice persists, a whisper in dreams, a tension in the body, a sudden wave of sadness without clear cause. This exile deepens when people adopt roles that are expected of them. Society, family, and culture often impose identities that may not align with one's inner reality. To fulfill these roles, people compromise with themselves, setting aside their true desires, their natural temperament, their authentic values. Over time, this adaptation may bring external acceptance, but inside it creates estrangement. It is as though a person builds a home for others while leaving themselves homeless. The smile becomes automatic, the response is rehearsed, the laughter hollow. The more they succeed at fitting in, the more isolated they feel from their own soul. The tragedy of avoidance is that it breeds repetition. What is not faced returns, not in the same form but in recurring patterns. A person who avoids anger may find themselves drawn to relationships that constantly provoke it. Someone who avoids their grief may unconsciously recreate situations that bring more loss. Life has a way of circling back to the truths we refuse to acknowledge. Avoidance does not prevent pain, it amplifies it and gives it new shapes. The inner exile then becomes not only a psychological state, but also a lived reality, where the outer world mirrors the inner disconnection. At the core of this exile is fear, the fear of what one might find if they truly stopped running. Many imagine that if they open the door to their suppressed emotions, they will be overwhelmed, that the shadows will consume them. And so they keep the door closed, unaware that the very act of keeping it shut gives those shadows more strength. In truth, what is feared is not destruction but transformation. To meet the self honestly may be uncomfortable, but it is not annihilation, it is a return. Yet as long as the fear holds sway, the person remains outside themselves, looking in at a life that could have been lived more fully. The consequence of such avoidance is a restless searching. People seek fulfillment in work, relationships, possessions, or distractions, yet the sense of exile remains because no external achievement can substitute for the intimacy with one's own soul. They may travel across continents, chase countless goals, or surround themselves with people, but the inner distance remains. The sense of belonging they crave cannot be given from outside, because it is the self that has been abandoned. Until that abandonment is addressed, nothing external can resolve the inner void. Avoidance of the self, then, is not simply a personal issue. It is a human condition that shapes entire lives. It disconnects us from our creativity, from authentic love, from the quiet joy of being aligned with our true nature. To live in inner exile is to move through the world like a ghost in one's own story, present yet absent, visible yet unseen. It is a prison without walls, built not by others but by the refusal to turn inward. The hidden self must be acknowledged, for what remains unseen within us holds more power over our lives than we realize. Every person carries within them aspects of their nature that they do not easily reveal to the world. Impulses, desires, fears, and vulnerabilities that do not fit into the image they wish to present. These aspects are not erased by ignoring them. Rather, they retreat into the depths of the psyche, where they continue to influence thoughts, emotions, and choices in subtle yet profound ways. To live while denying the hidden self is to walk half, blind, unable to fully understand the forces that shape one's existence. The hidden self is often born out of necessity. As children, many of us learned that certain emotions or traits were unacceptable. Anger may have been met with punishment, sadness with dismissal, or curiosity with shame. In response, we learn to suppress these parts, locking them away so that we might be accepted, loved, or simply safe. What we call the hidden self is not an enemy, but a collection of these exiled fragments of experience and identity. They are stored deep within us, waiting unresolved, shaping our inner world in silence. When these aspects of the self are ignored, they find other ways to emerge. They may surface in sudden bursts of emotion, in unexplained anxiety, in recurring conflicts, or even in dreams that reveal what our waking mind refuses to face. The person who denies their anger may experience constant tension in relationships. One who hides their grief may feel a persistent emptiness, no matter how much joy surrounds them. The hidden self does not remain silent. It speaks in symbols, in moods, and in patterns that repeat until it is heard. Acknowledgement of the hidden self requires honesty. It means allowing ourselves to see the parts we would rather turn away from. This is not easy, because the hidden self often contains elements that contradict the way we wish to see ourselves. A person who prides themselves on kindness may discover resentment they never admit. Someone who strives for strength may uncover vulnerability they fear to show. Yet acknowledgement is not condemnation. To acknowledge does not mean to approve or indulge. It means to recognize reality as it is. Only in recognition does transformation become possible. The hidden self also contains untapped potential. Alongside the traits we consider undesirable are gifts and strengths that were once suppressed. Creativity, boldness, intuition, and passion often get buried along with pain and fear. Many individuals live constrained lives, not because they lack ability, but because they have exiled vital parts of their being. To acknowledge the hidden self is to reclaim these forgotten powers, to open the door to a fuller and richer existence. Avoiding the hidden self leads to projection. What we cannot face in ourselves, we often see in others. The person who denies their own selfishness may be quick to label others as selfish. The one who hides their jealousy may constantly accuse those around them of envy. In this way, unacknowledged traits distort our perception of the world, making it difficult to see others clearly. By facing the hidden self, we reduce this distortion, freeing ourselves to engage with people and life more authentically. The act of acknowledgement is an act of compassion. Instead of treating our hidden self as a monster lurking in the shadows, we can approach it as a neglected child who has long been waiting for attention. Each suppressed emotion, each buried memory, was once a response to pain, rejection, or fear. When we turn toward these parts with understanding rather than judgment, healing begins. What was once a source of shame becomes a doorway to deeper wisdom and self-acceptance. The hidden self, left unacknowledged, chains us to cycles of repetition. We repeat the same mistakes, attract the same kind of relationships, or sabotage ourselves in familiar ways, all without fully understanding why. But the moment we bring these hidden elements into awareness, we interrupt the cycle. Awareness gives us choice. When we know what lives inside us, we are no longer controlled by it. We can engage with it consciously, redirect it, and even integrate it into a greater sense of wholeness. Acknowledgement is not a single act but an ongoing process. The hidden self does not reveal everything at once. It comes forward gradually, in layers, as trust is built within our own psyche. Each moment of acknowledgement brings greater clarity, a sense of relief, and a closer connection to our true identity. In time, what once felt threatening becomes familiar, and what once felt like exile transforms into belonging. To acknowledge the hidden self is to honor the entirety of one's being. It is to recognize that every shadow has meaning, every silence holds a message, and every concealed part of us deserves a place in the story of our life. The more we turn toward these hidden aspects, the more deeply we come to know ourselves, not as fragments in conflict, but as a whole and complex human being who has finally been seen. Courage is required for self-confrontation because facing oneself is perhaps the most demanding challenge a person can undertake. It is far easier to point outward, to analyze the flaws of others, to identify the problems in society, or to blame circumstances for our struggles. Turning inward, however, strips away those defenses. It requires us to meet the raw truth of who we are, our contradictions, our weaknesses, our unfulfilled desires, and the parts of ourselves we would prefer to keep hidden. To confront oneself is to stand in front of a mirror that does not lie, and that honesty can be terrifying. Many people avoid this confrontation because it threatens the image they have carefully constructed. We all create identities, roles as parents, professionals, friends, or achievers that help us navigate the world. Yet beneath those identities lives the fuller self, often carrying unresolved pain, repressed emotions, and forgotten dreams. To look inward is to risk shattering the illusion of control, to admit that the story we tell about ourselves is incomplete, and that acknowledgement takes tremendous bravery. Self-confrontation often begins with discomfort. A sudden recognition during a quiet moment, a persistent feeling of dissatisfaction, or the stirring of emotions we cannot explain. All are invitations to look within, but the initial instinct is usually resistance. We distract ourselves with work, relationships, entertainment, or busyness so that we do not have to listen. To ignore what arises feels safer, but safety in this case is an illusion. What is buried does not disappear, it lingers, shaping our lives in unseen ways. Courage is required because choosing to listen means stepping into uncertainty. There is a reason why people fear self-confrontation. The psyche contains not only light, but also shadow. The shadow is composed of the traits, desires, and impulses we deny or reject in ourselves. To confront it is to admit that we are not as pure, as strong, or as flawless as we may wish to appear. Acknowledging jealousy, pride, resentment, or vulnerability can feel like betrayal to the image we uphold. It takes courage to admit these parts not because they make us less human, but because they make us more human, and that raw humanity can be unsettling to accept. But courage in this sense is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward despite it. It is the strength to sit with discomfort, to face the thoughts that disturb us, and to feel the emotions we would rather suppress. Many people fear being overwhelmed by what they find inside, as though opening the door to their inner world will unleash chaos. Yet courage allows us to trust that we can endure the encounter, that the truths within us are not meant to destroy but to reveal. Self-confrontation also demands responsibility. Once we see what lies within, we cannot unsee it. If we discover patterns of self-sabotage, destructive habits, or unacknowledged wounds, we are faced with the choice to change. Change requires effort, persistence, and honesty. It requires us to take ownership of our lives rather than remain passive victims of circumstance. This responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also liberating, for it gives us the power to reshape our lives with awareness instead of unconscious repetition. Courage is also necessary because self-confrontation often stirs grief. To look inward is to encounter the parts of ourselves that were neglected, silenced, or abandoned long ago. We may mourn the childhood we lost, the opportunities we let slip, or the relationships that were harmed by our denial. Facing these truths means accepting the weight of the past, and that acceptance is painful. Yet grief, when faced with courage, becomes a form of healing. It allows us to release the hold of what has been and step more fully into what can be. The act of confronting oneself is not a single dramatic moment, but an ongoing practice. Every time we choose honesty over denial, reflection over avoidance, or growth over comfort, we are exercising courage. It may be in admitting a mistake, in recognizing our need for help, or in acknowledging a truth we have long resisted. These small acts of courage accumulate, deepening our relationship with ourselves and fostering an inner strength that no external approval can provide. Ultimately, courage in self-confrontation is about opening the door to authenticity. Without courage, we remain trapped in roles and illusions, disconnected from our deeper nature. With courage, we reclaim the power to live as whole beings, aware of our light and our shadow, willing to carry both with dignity. It is not an easy path, and it never ends, but each act of bravery brings us closer to the truth of who we are. And in that truth lies the foundation for genuine freedom, peace, and strength. The inward journey leads to authentic life because it draws us away from the illusions that the external world imposes and reconnects us with the core of who we are. Most people are conditioned to look outward for meaning, measuring themselves by achievements, possessions, appearances, and the approval of others. From childhood, we are taught to conform to expectations, to play roles that secure belonging, and to seek validation from sources outside ourselves. Yet this pursuit often leaves a person feeling hollow, as though something essential has been left unattended. Authentic life begins not by adding more to the surface, but by turning inward and discovering the truth that lies beneath. The inward journey requires solitude and reflection. It is in silence, away from constant distraction, that we begin to notice the subtle voice of the inner self. This voice is easily drowned out by the demands of daily life, but when we choose to listen, it reveals what we truly long for, what we truly fear, and what we are capable of becoming. To journey inward is to step into the depths of the psyche, a territory that contains both light and shadow. It is not always comfortable, for in the process we encounter aspects of ourselves we may have ignored or denied. Yet it is precisely this encounter that clears the path toward authenticity. An authentic life cannot be built on denial. When we hide our emotions, repress our memories, or silence our desires, we live as fragments of ourselves. Outwardly, we may appear successful, agreeable, or strong, but inwardly there is a disconnection that creates restlessness and unease. By turning inward, we reclaim those forgotten parts, allowing them to find expression and integration. In doing so, life becomes more aligned, more honest, and more whole. Authenticity is not about perfection, but about congruence. What we feel, what we believe, and how we live begin to align in harmony. The inward journey also teaches us freedom. When we are dependent on external approval, our identity is fragile, constantly shifting with the opinions of others. We shape ourselves to fit expectations, and in doing so, we lose sight of our own truth. But the inward path reminds us that value does not come from outside. It arises from the very fact of being. By grounding ourselves in this inner reality, We gain resilience against the changing tides of public opinion or social pressure. Authentic life is free life, a life not enslaved by masks or roles, but rooted in inner truth. There is also great creativity that comes from the inward journey. Buried within the psyche are not only wounds but also untapped gifts, dreams once set aside, passions once silenced, insights that could not find space in the noise of daily living. As we turn inward, we uncover these treasures, and they begin to flow into the world as expressions of authenticity. The artist rediscovers their vision, the thinker their clarity, the lover their depth of feeling. Authentic life is not passive. It is a continual unfolding of the inner richness into outer form. This path inward demands honesty. It means admitting when we are living in contradiction to our values, when our relationships lack truth, or when our ambitions are driven more by fear than by purpose. Honesty with oneself can be unsettling, but it also liberates. When we face the reality of who we are, we no longer need to maintain the exhausting performance of who we pretend to be. The relief of such honesty opens space for genuine connection with ourselves, with others, and with the world. The inward journey is not a retreat from life, but a return to it in its truest form. When we know ourselves deeply, we engage with others not from a place of need or pretense, but from a place of wholeness. Relationships become more meaningful because they are not based on masks but on authenticity. Work becomes more fulfilling because it expresses who we are rather than who we are expected to be. Choices gain clarity because they arise from inner alignment rather than external pressure. An authentic life is not free from struggle, but its struggles are different. They are honest struggles, aligned with one's true path rather than imposed by false expectations. The inward journey equips us to meet these struggles with integrity because we are no longer divided within ourselves. We carry both our light and our shadow consciously, and in this integration we find strength. Ultimately, the inward journey is the path that transforms existence from mere survival into meaningful being. It is the recognition that beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the roles and the masks, there exists a self that is constant, deep, and true. To live from this place is to live authentically, not as a copy of others' expectations, but as the unique expression of one's own soul. It is here within that life finds its most genuine form, and from here that every outward action gains its real significance. The journey within is not an escape from life, but the deepest way of entering it. When we dare to confront ourselves, when we acknowledge what is hidden and integrate what we once rejected, we return to the world with greater clarity, freedom, and strength. The right path is never about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who we are beneath the masks and living from that truth. So let us carry forward the courage to stop avoiding ourselves. Let us honor both our light and our shadow. And let us step into an authentic life, not as fragments searching for completion, but as whole beings who have finally come home to themselves. Thank you.